Hey there, Wargamers. Austin here with Death Ray Designs, and today we're going to be painting some more base toppers. This time we'll be painting the new Tempus Tech set, which is available now on our site, so check it out and hang out with us while we paint a set. I've pulled some of the paints that we're going to need today for this project, and I want to aim for something a little bit more alien, maybe something that we could use for one of the Necron kill teams that we're building right now. To put some greens, yellow, which we may or may not use, blacks, grays, and silvers, and some beige. Because over here, let's take a look closer. We've got the upper sections of these base toppers, and we've got the lower sections of the base toppers. This exposed lattice work, I think that we're going to do in a beige color, and then we're going to keep the uppers a little bit darker green, and then do some organic stenciling on them so that if we keep it dark, we can do some interesting OSL on top of some of the vents. And we want to keep it dark so that the OSL really stands out. But we also want the lower section to contrast with the top, so we'll do that lighter in a beige color. Before we start on the upper areas, we're going to do a lot of green colors. Let's attack the beige color at the bottom. That way we can do this really quickly. We can pull them off of the sheet and get them out of the way so we don't accidentally spray green all over them, because we're going to be spending a little bit more time on the upper parts. So let's just go ahead and do the lowers. This is Minotaur bark. Use this for just about everything that has brown in it, it seems. Okay, so we're going to start off just doing a light coat over everything here. And we don't have to worry about these parts because they're going to be covered up. We don't have any punch throughs on these pieces, so really all we're worried about are the actual lattice work, and on this one, the little striated area. Okay, and I'm going to try to come in kind of at an angle and get the edges of these just because you'll see them when they're on the base. Up next, we're going to switch over to Minotaur Cracked Soil. This is kind of a, I guess, almost like pinky off-white color, but I feel like when it's on top of brown, it makes for a really nice beige color. You end up with a interesting, I guess, khaki sort of thing, just less green. Okay, and for this one, I think I want to focus on the areas closest to where the upper layers are going to intersect. So we get dark area on top to, you know, a much lighter area right next to it. We're going for maximum contrast here. So this arc area is right where we want to land. Okay, and then we just feather it back and start pulling away as we get towards the bottom, just so that we get a transition from this nice light beige color to the darker. And it's a little bit distracting to see it on the board behind it right now, but I promise it'll look right when we get there. All right. Now also remember that we've got a little tine that sticks out of the middle there, so we're going to come right down the middle a little bit and mostly just try to leave it dark at those corners. All right, so this guy should be just more of the same. So we'll probably end up doing some weathering on these guys at the end, but for right now, these are pretty much done, and we can pull them off to make sure they're out of the way so that we can work on the upper green areas and not have to worry about overspraying or masking them right now. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I didn't actually super glue these right down to the MDF. They are glued. We left the paper backer on these guys. They ship with a paper backer on them, and it makes it much easier to mount them temporarily to something, and also protects them in transit. So that one came all the way off. That's fine. We don't need that paper backer anymore. But it gives you an opportunity to solidly mount that to something. So it's not gonna shift off or do anything while you're working on it, but then it doesn't actually damage the product when you start removing it. So there we go. And you can see it's torn up the paper and everything, but if we go in here and peel off the backer, so it should not have any residue or anything, so it should be nice and smooth and ready to glue down to something. Now with those moved off to the side, we can focus on the green parts. So starting on the green, we're gonna put a base coat of Orc Complexion, which is another Minotaur color down. And we don't have to be particularly heavy-handed with this. I just wanna give it a general green tint to it. And Orc Complexion's a little on the green side, or I'm sorry, a little on the blue side of green. So I don't wanna overdo it here. We'll be covering it up with a lot of other greens, but I just at least want to give the black a tiny little green tinge. Just getting the edges. More than anything, we don't want to leave anything looking stark black. So that just in case we miss something later, at least it's got a little bit of a green tint to it. Up next, we're going to start working with some silver. I'm using the Outline Silver from Montana, but there's plenty of other good silver paints you can use out there. I just prefer this stuff because it's super opaque and it's already thinned down for the airbrush. So we're going to load up just a teeny tiny bit in here. So the idea is that we're going to make an aged looking metal kind of surface by using an organic stencil with the silver, and then we're going to do a little bit of shading and maybe even speckle in a couple other tones of color, and then we're gonna go over it with a ghost tint green. Ghost tints are a translucent paint, or rather a transparent paint. It's also called a candy coat, but ghost tints are specifically the Minotaur candy coats, and it's good for retinting something. So if we put silver down right now, and we'd use ghost tint green on top of it, that means that we're gonna turn that silver into like a metallic green. So we're going to use this organic stencil, and this is actually one of the newer ones that we have in the store. This is the organic grunge stencil, and it is specifically the oil board version of it. We've had a mylar version of it for a long time, but we decided to shrink it down and go with oil board just because you can pack a lot more detail into it and it doesn't start melting on you. So it's much cleaner edges. So we're just laying this out, and I'm trying to keep almost all of it covered pretty well here. I don't want to have too many of those giant open spots on our piece right now, but I'm just doing a tiny, tiny little thin coat over it, and it's giving us this this uneven, splotchy sort of silver color. And if you layer this up well, oh, we got a little heavy there, but that's okay. So with the splotchy texture that we've put down, we're kind of going for a either weathered or really old metal or even a galvanized looking steel. I think that it'll look really good once we put the green ghost tint on top of it and recolor it. But I also think that we probably need to do a little bit more layering first. So I'm gonna use the rest of the silver on a couple little spots here on the big one. Maybe we've got a couple of slightly brighter areas. Just gonna pick a couple of spots there. Maybe something a little bit brighter in the middle of this one too. We're not trying to super overdo it. I just want a little more. There we go. Maybe like a little something right there. Okay. All right, there we go. So we've got a pretty nice contrast going on here, and this is going to be the base that we're going to be working with, and we'll do some masking next and pick out some areas that we want to be different colors to help break up the surface. One of the keys to achieving a more convincing weathered metal effect is multiple layers. And when you're doing multiple layers, you can sometimes make it too busy, at which point it just looks like a mess. So one of the ways that you can combat that is using paints that are not particularly opaque. So just like we were talking about ghost tints a second ago, I've also made up a black tint out of FW ink and a whole bunch of matte varnish. So this is something that you may have seen me use in other videos, but I love using it because it's hard to overdo it with it. There's only like a couple of drops of that FW black ink in here. Oh my goodness, it's sealed shut. All right, so we've got just a little bit of this. If I start putting this down, you can still see through it very clearly, but it starts to leave a little bit of a shadow. So that's the effect that we really want here. And we're gonna start layering up a little bit with the organic stencil on what we've already done so far. And the idea being that, like with most bases that we do here in the studio, we like to have it darker around the edge and brighter in the middle. So to do that, we're gonna use the stencil like this, where most of what we've got covered up is the middle, but the edge is a little bit more exposed. So we're gonna start coming in around this edge here. Okay. So it's very subtle, but you can start to see that we're sort of dimming around the edges here. And I'm just trying to mostly hit the edges. Okay. There we go. Okay, and on this one, I'm not gonna even bother using the stencil. I'm just gonna throw a little on the edge. Okay, so we're starting to build up a little bit of a layering thing. Over here you can see the really bright silver and then the darker areas and the green. We're gonna be able to unify this all with the green ghost tint at the end and sort of pull it all together. I worry that if we go ahead and put the ghost tint green down now, that it's going to be maybe even a little too dark. So I'm thinking that perhaps we'll come back in the center since we're trying hard to make the centers pop. Let's come back in and add a little bit of something extra there just to help intensify it in the middle. All right, so I grabbed a Dusty Ground. This is another Minotaur paint, and it's just sort of a really light gray color. This one's actually pretty good already. This one's got a really nice bright center to it, but I'm thinking this big one over here could probably stand to have a little bit more in the middle. So I'm going to just start really slow here. I'm gonna try to just build up a little tiny bit. Okay, so that's still not quite where we want it. I want a slightly hotter center here. And you could use the silver again for this part, but I kind of like the idea of some parts being more shiny and metallic and other parts being really dull and dusty. And it doesn't take a whole lot. You can overdo it pretty quickly. It's like the stencil is great, but as soon as you start going too heavy with it, it can sometimes look a bit overwhelming. That is about the maximum of what we'd want on that one. I'm gonna come back to this first large one again, and let's just see if we can strengthen that up a little bit. I'm just feeling like that's getting a little bit muddied, so I'm gonna kind of quit while we're ahead here on that one. I do feel like we've got a nice brighter area in the middle now, so I'm happy with that. So let's throw some ghost tint down on it and see what we got. Let's put some down here on the bases. All right, so now we got this really funky, weird looking texture under here, and I'm liking this, but we also do need to figure out what sections we're going to do in a slightly different tone, because while this is interesting, it can't be the whole thing just because it'll all sort of bleed together if we do it that way. So let's get some Frisket film and we're gonna figure out exactly where the other colors are gonna go in the next step. Our ghost tint green is now dry, so we can go ahead and apply some Frisket film. In the intervening time, I've kind of come up with a little bit of a plan about how and where I'd like to color the rest of these. So we're gonna have a lot of sort of alternating base gray, which is just a medium gray color here from Minotaur. So we're gonna put this down, and then I am going to come in here with the hobby knife and start removing all of the areas that we want to be base gray. So let's start with this big one here, and we're going to, I've got a little road map here. This upper piece, we're just gonna slice that off. We're gonna have to kind of come past. There we go. So now we can remove this. And the nice thing about acrylic base toppers is that because the engrave lines here are hard plastic, you can use a knife and it kind of guides your knife through the Frisket film or masking tape, whichever you're using. So our next base gray area is going to be this line in between the sort of hazard stripe area and the next section of the base. Make sure we're in the groove here. There we are. Easy peasy. Making sure to press down those edges as we move along here. And our next area is going to be this one that has these elongated ovals in it. All right, so we've got our areas, 1, 2, 3 areas that are going to be base gray. I'm going to do the same thing on all the rest of these so we can do them all at the same time, and we'll be back in a sec. Now that we've got our frisket film down, let's go ahead and load up the base gray. Okay, so we're going to go sort of light coats as we go here. We don't want to dump tons and tons of paint on here. Now on the edges here, like where you can see the edge where it'll be showing on the base, I'm going to try to come in a little bit and just get a little bit there. I know that it's not going to make a perfectly hard line, but it's worth getting a little bit to wrap around that bottom edge. Okay, and we don't really have one here, so. All right, start coming back in with a second coat on top of everything. Now that we've got that color down, we're going to want to move on to some of the other colors here. We've got some black areas to do, and we've got some green areas to do. So let's go ahead and peel that back, see how we're doing there. Okay, looking pretty good. That frisket film is pretty much trash now, but we've got those blocked in pretty well. It looks like I might have had a little bit of a slip right here with the frisket film because I can see it going up and onto those areas a little bit, but we can clean that up without too much effort. In fact, let's see if I can do that real quick. I'm going to take the flat edge of a hobby knife. Let's go back. We're going to pull that top layer of paint back off, and I'm just barely applying any pressure at all. But yeah. You can see now that it's a much cleaner line. It's not bleeding over the recess onto our green area. Time for more frisket film. We've got a piece that's already kind of in the right general shape here. Let's drop this guy on here. Just gonna press all that on, making sure that we've got good tack all over the place here. So now we've got to identify the places that we're going to do next, which one area is going to be black. That is going to be the small areas inside of each of the segments on this front gray line here. And we're going to do the same thing over here, and with those. And then we've also got green, which is going to be in this sort of outer arc on the other side of these striations in between the sort of hazard stripey looking thing and the gray. So we also have that same formation over here on this one. So we'll put green on that one as well. I guess either some kind of light OSL, or maybe we'll just have it sort of fade in there. So let's go ahead and start cutting out some of these little ovals here where we're going to put the black. This part is probably going to be somewhat tedious. And you could totally skip this part if you don't want to, or you could paint them by hand. That might actually be easier, but if you've got an airbrush and you want to do some like little shading things with it, this is the easiest way to get these little areas exposed while preserving all the areas around it. Come on. There we go. One down. I scratched it up a little bit, but we're going to be painting over it anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much. So now it's time to put some gray into these ovals now that we've got them all cut out. And we're going to be using the gravel color from Montana. But this is just a darker gray, so use whatever gray you've got. Anything just a little bit lighter than like charcoal gray is going to be good. So I'm going to put down a layer of this over the whole thing first. Okay, we want that to be nice and opaque. It might take a second or two to dry, and then what we're gonna do is come back in with black and hit just in between each of these lines. So like this area right here, and here, and here, and there, so that we get a transition from dark to light in the middle, and then back to dark to back to light in the middle, dark, light, so on and so forth. It's a little tough to see here. This is actually looking super duper dark under the close cam here. But that is a gray color on top. So now we're going over to the FW ink. One more weird paint Austin uses. Now, you may have seen me use this in other tutorials, but the reason that I like it is because it is very, very thin right out of the bottle, and it is super duper opaque. So let's get in here, and we're gonna start on this end, and we'll move down. So I'm taking it real easy here. Okay, on to the next one here. Okay, and in between there, and in between here. All right, I'm gonna blow just a little bit of air on here, dry this off so we can see what we've got. I think that's looking pretty good. We can come back in here and darken up right next to the edge just a little bit more. Look in there, you can see generally what we've got going on here. For the next part, we're gonna be putting down some of that really bright Montana green on a couple of arcs on the bases, like we pointed out before. I'm gonna go ahead and get the Frisket film on there. You've seen me do it a bunch of times in this video, so there's no need to, bore you guys with a ton more Frisket film. And now for the green, we've got it all masked off. You can see there on the close-up, and we're gonna load up our airbrush with just a little bit of this Montana acid green here. You can also see that I've gone ahead and put down some gray just to even it out before we start this. So we're gonna go nice and light for our first coat here. This stuff is pretty opaque, but if you let it, it can run all over the place. Okay, so you can just use a little bit of air, dry this off, start coming back in with another nice, thin, light coat. Back and forth. Let the paint do the work. There we go. Whoo boy, that is a bright, bright green. I think before we get into the yellow for the centers of these, let's go ahead and grab some slightly darker green. This is Envy Green from Minotaur, and it's a pretty normal looking kind of Kelly green color. Almost looks really translucent here. Maybe we should go even darker. Maybe we'll go for the orc complexion. It's a little darker, more like a hunter green here. So let's throw in a couple drops. And our plan is to hit the edges so that we get like a darker area on both sides, and then this nice bright green in the middle, and then a really bright yellow right in the center of it. I'm also probably not going to do any of the darker on this little guy up here just because we don't have a lot of space, and if we're only gonna get to do one effect, I'd rather have the yellow on it. Okay, so we don't have to go too crazy on this here, but I think that really helps a lot. Having the dark with the light ends up making the light look just that much brighter. Easy peasy. Nothing to it, so we're gonna swap over to yellow and get the centers. As is the case seemingly with most of the colors we're using today, this is another Montana color, and this one is some kind of shock yellow something. I think that the thing is worn off. Fluorescent flash yellow? Flash yellow, okay. So we'll start down here on this one. And you can always work on the Frisket film off your actual workspace first, just to make sure that you're dialed in well. There we go. There we are. Nice and bright right there in the middle. Let's get back here on this one. Okay. Let me just make sure when this dries, it's gonna look right. Okay, so that tones down a little bit once it's dry. Let's come back right dead center and try to get a nice opaque area. All right, so this little tiny sliver here, we're just gonna see if we can just get a little bit right there. Just a teeny tiny little smidge. Okay, now that's looking pretty good. Let's see what it actually looks like once we got the Frisket film off. There we go. Rock on. That is looking pretty cool. Super, super intense. I'm really digging that. So now we've got a little bit more OSL to do right here on these little vent areas. And we're going to use some more of the acid green. And then what I'm probably going to do is come back in and just touch up with a normal hairbrush. Just on these little like vent pieces, just so it looks like those are the things that are actually emitting the light. And we'll keep those OSL areas pretty tight in around there. We don't want it to blow out onto absolutely everything around it. We want to keep it contained, but a nice little glow should do well for this effect. So now I've loaded up the green again, and I guess let's figure out where we're going to start. Let's start over here on this big one. General best practices when you're doing OSL are, it's really a less is more kind of game here. So we want to get ourselves dialed in here. And I'm barely pulling back on the trigger. Just tiny little bit at a time here. Okay. I think that's looking pretty good. So let's go on to this other one here. It's working back and forth. You don't ever want to stop moving entirely. There we go. All right, rock on. So now all we got to do is come back in by hand with a little bit of yellow on each of these little tines. And we don't necessarily have to really super saturate it or do any kind of wet blending or anything. I'm just going to try to just get a little graze of yellow right over the top of it to help give it a little bit more intensity, just like these lines. All right, so we've gone back to our flashed yellow, and we're just gonna come in here one piece at a time here, just barely trying to touch these tops. Okay, so I've done the thing that you want to avoid here. I got a bunch of paint down in the area between, and it's easy enough to fix. I'm just gonna grab a little bit of water. I should have had my water cup out before we started this. But before that stuff dries, I'm gonna rinse my brush out just a little bit. I'm gonna add a little bit of water to what's already there to dilute it. I'm gonna dry my brush off the best that I can. I'm gonna use it like a little vacuum cleaner, suck up as much of that as I can. You can wipe your brush off and keep going back a couple more times. Try to clean that up. And if you find that it still looks a little bit muddied, you can always go back in with some really, really thin black ink and just kind of touch that line, and it'll go all over the place there. So while that's drying up, because the capillary action of whatever water we left in there is probably going to be still pretty active and might draw more paint down in there, we're going to let that dry completely. We're going to skip over it, and we're going to go on to the next one. If you find that you're having a really difficult time keeping it under control in this situation, you may want to switch to a thicker paint. These Montana paints are super thin, and they flow really easily, but it also means that it can skate down into those details really easily as well. So I finished up all the yellow on these little slats, and I guess we've got a little bit of final weathering to do. You can see here on the edge of this one that when I had the Frisket film down, I apparently just pulled a little bit of paint away, but that's okay, because it's kind of like the weathering that we were planning on doing anyhow. So I've got a tiny little piece of sandpaper here, and this is 220, but I've also sort of rubbed it against itself so that it's a really fine grit. You can probably, instead of doing that with 220, do maybe like a 400 grit or something like that. But I'm just going to take off a little bit of paint on the edges here so that it exposes the black primer underneath. And I'm going to do my best to stay away from the yellow areas because I don't want those to get weathering at the edges. So let's just see if we can scrape up a little bit of that. There we go. Getting a little bit of that there at the corner. There we go. Just intensify that up just a hair. Yeah, I'm liking how that's looking. So back here on this edge, we can get just a little bit there. Now, I don't know if this edge is necessarily going to take a whole lot of it. Like, you're not necessarily going to see it quite as stark, but I'm going to do just a little bit anyway, just to see. Yeah, we get a little bit of scratches and stuff right there. That looks pretty cool. And then we can come in here, a little bit on this corner. Yeah, just a little touch. And a little touch over here. Maybe just a little. Yeah, you don't want to go overboard on that. We've already got a lot of like interesting organic textures in a lot of these spots, so I'm not too worried about adding more interest. We've already added a ton of stuff and a ton of detail on this. So the last part is going to be adding in some weathering on these guys. These are the lower sections we did right at the beginning of the tutorial. We'll just do a little bit, just catching some edges here, kind of giving a few little scuffs and scrapes. Yeah, I think that looks nice. Let's move on to this guy. Yeah, cool. And this one here. Okay, yeah, nothing too extreme. I think that's looking nice too. All right, so let's pop these guys off of this, just like we did at the beginning with the other pieces. All right, and we can peel the backs off of these guys, and that way they'll be prepped and ready for glue onto the lower sections. Actually, let's take a quick little peek here because I'm impatient and I'm curious. Yeah, that's looking pretty sweet. I just got a little bit of super glue here on there, and I'm gonna take a paper towel and just kind of smush this out to the edges, and also is gonna remove some of the excess. And then we'll go ahead and glue this down in place. And I'm gonna be careful not to press on it until I've got it exactly where I want it, so I can still move it around a little bit. I'm just gonna check on the back side and make sure that it's all lined up. And then give it a little push. Pressing it down. And there we go, we got one base done, and we'll see how it looks on an actual base. Yeah. Whoop. Now, if you wanted to, you could also color the top of the base. So if you wanted to have something like, you know, a glow effect happening inside of this lattice work, you could. It's just one more surface that you could do some effects on. You can leave it black or paint it gray, just do whatever. If you feel like that doesn't look finished enough, you can always add color. So as much as I like the way that this looks right now, I think that we could do something extra. We can go ahead and paint the top of the base like I was just talking about, and I think that that will really give us an interesting effect. Now, if our little experiment at the end doesn't go so well, just skip that step. It's fine. So my thoughts are, we got our bases, they're already primed black. We just put a little piece of tape around the edge to keep the edge black, and then we put some of the bright green on there, maybe try to hit some of the bright yellow right in the center, and that way it kind of matches the other green glowing effects on here. So as I'm putting this down, I'm gonna try to keep pressure on it so that it kind of stretches a little bit. And with paper tape, this is not always the easiest thing to do, but it can be done, so we're gonna give it a shot. I think we're gonna follow the same steps that we did as our little stripes. So we'll get green. We don't have to get all of it, we just need to get about half of it because this is only going to show about half of the base. So let's, you can kind of see the midway line on this one, so I'm just gonna kind of stick to that. I could probably stand one more coat just to make sure that we're completely opaque, but I think we're on the right track here. All right, get some of our flash green, or I'm sorry, flash yellow. And we're gonna get some right there in the middle. We want it to come out kind of far, just because we wanna make sure that some of it actually makes it into the area where you're gonna see through the grating. So now we've gotta switch back to our orc complexion to get the rim. Just need a couple of drops there. Okay, right on. It's looking pretty good. Okay, so let's clean up our airbrush and see how this looks now. All right, so let's peel this guy off. So there we are. And voila. All right, I think that looks pretty cool now. Yeah, that is a much deeper, more interesting base in my opinion now, because you've got all this green motif up here and you've got it carried to whatever's underneath all that lattice work. I think that's pretty excellent. So the only thing we'd have left to do is clean up that edge where we got just a little bit of the paint getting under the masking tape. And if you wanted to on the back side where you can still kind of see a little bit of that green ring from the actual base itself, that's fine too. So now we've got all of our bases done up the same way, and I think these look great. That extra green underneath really helps it pop and adds another layer of depth. You're taking advantage of a layer that's already going to be there, which is the base, and I think you can do some really cool effects with this. And you can swap out the green for whatever color your army happens to be if you want it to match. You could have orange glows or red glows or blue glows or yellow glows, whatever. It's, I think, going to be a pretty versatile set of effects that you could do on this set of bases. So thank you guys for coming along and hanging out with us while I painted these. It was a lot of fun, and it's one of those where I keep staring at it and thinking, wow, I cannot wait to get some minis on these. These look really cool. I've got a Necron kill team just waiting for this. So definitely go check these out over at deathraydesigns.com. They are available right now. They're called Tempus Tech, and you can find these in tons of sizes for Warhammer 40K and Infinity. I think they'll go great for lots of projects, and if this one doesn't work for you, we've got tons of other ones, so check those out too. If you're watching this over on YouTube, give us a thumbs up if you like the video. Definitely subscribe if you haven't already, and if you're watching this somewhere else like Facebook, make sure to give us a comment, like the video, do all the normal social media things, and yeah, I can't wait to use these. So go check them out and share pictures. If this is super old now and you're just checking this out, put some pictures somewhere and link us. We'd love to see what you're doing with our bases. Until next time, happy wargaming.